Hello, my name is Ruth Childs. I'm an expert on curing focal dystonia. Many of you may have already seen previous videos of mine. In 2002, now, in just under a month, at the end of March, I'm going to be releasing my book on focal dystonia and how to cure it. So what I've been doing is I've been recording some videos just to give you some information about that. The previous video that I shared was about the first part of the book, which is what's happening in your brain and your body to cause the focal dystonia. And today I'd like to read an excerpt from that, and I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 2. In chapter 1, what I talked about was that the underlying cause of the focal dystonia is that your nervous system is in survival mode rather than safe mode. Now, that survival mode can be a hyperactivation of your nervous system or a hypoactivation of your nervous system. The hyperactivation, at its most extreme, is anger, rage, frustration, feeling aggressive towards other people or towards a situation. But it can be more subtle, just a sense of comparison, of never feeling good enough, that I've got to try harder, kind of an overactivation of the mind. And feelings of competitivity, feelings of inferiority or superiority. I go into a lot more detail of that in the book. And the hypoactivation of the nervous system that some of you may experience is just that feeling of wanting to curl up inside of yourself, to retreat from the world, to go into a cave, of feeling small, maybe even life just feels flat and grey and just has sort of lost its joy and its meaning. So what I've done in chapter 2 then is talk about how that activation actually affects your physical body. And I wanted to read this excerpt. I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit of a longer video because I'm going to read the whole of the chapter. But I'd like to read that to you so that you really start to get an understanding of what's happening and why your body has responded in this way. So chapter 2, activation and dystonic movements. The activation of the autonomic nervous system leads to dystonic movements in your body. I have noticed that a convergence of 3 physical survival responses is in play. They are 1. Dissociation, 2. The priming of large muscle groups, and 3. The activation of primary survival movements. As I explain each in more detail, see if you can feel like a row of dominoes is falling. The last domino to fall is the manifestation of the dystonic movements in your body. It is valuable for you to get this sense because in the same way that it is the last domino to fall, it will probably be the last one to stand back up again. In your recovery, we need to focus on putting all the previous dominoes upright first. By this I mean our focus needs to come away from where you have the dystonic movements. We firstly center on bringing your autonomic nervous system into safety, reassociating with your body and letting go of any ingrained dystonic mental patterns. As this happens, your body will automatically respond and the dystonic movements will fade away on their own. Because of the way the brain automates movements and actions, the body may sometimes continue to express a little bit of the dystonia. This means that at the very end of the process, when everything else is sufficiently resolved, we will, if necessary, focus on the physical body and pop upright the last domino. 1. Dissociation and the loss of interreceptive sensitivity. At the end of the previous chapter, I talked about dissociation and how it is a natural and intelligent brain response. It protects you from danger and from feeling pain. However, if your nervous system has gone into survival mode, this dissociation becomes more pernicious. You lose connection to yourself, to others, and to what is really going on inside of you mentally, emotionally, and physically. This can have many negative consequences that include no longer feeling your physical body, passing your physical, mental, and emotional limits, and staying in intolerable situations that continue to make your nervous system to feel threatened. One of the broader physical impacts of focal dystonia is that your dissociation has probably become extreme and focalized. Most people describe that they no longer feel in detail the part of their body where the dystonia has manifested itself, or that it is all that they can feel. The people who've lost the feeling describe it as an internal map of that part of the body becoming muddled or blurred. Some people may feel as though that part of their body no longer belongs to them, or that it is completely numb. On the other hand, people have said that the dystonic part of their body takes all their attention and they are constantly focused on it. The rest of the body feels like it has disappeared or gone to sleep. On a more general level, once they can feel their body, they often notice some asymmetry in it, meaning that one side of their body feels remarkably different from the other. Another way of describing dissociation is the loss of interreceptive sensitivity. Interoception is a technical term that means the sense of the internal state of the body. It is both conscious and subconscious. In practical terms, when we have a high level of interoceptive sensitivity, it gives us the feeling of really inhabiting the body and having a direct experience of how it feels from the inside. At the same time, we are aware of the emotional and mental tone accompanying the internal physical sensations. This is the direct opposite of the activated nervous system states. In these states, we may be in our head and identifying strongly with our thoughts, meaning we believe that we are our thoughts. They are who I am. Alternatively, we may be outside of ourselves, somehow disconnected and absent. A high level of interoceptive sensitivity is vital in our capacity to create and maintain homeostasis, internal balance and harmony in all our internal functions. On a very practical level, interoceptive sensitivity is vital for us as musicians. The level of fine motor skills we require is so subtle and detailed that having a high level of interoceptive sensitivity is the base that enables this level of finesse in our technique. In summary, the continued activation of the autonomic nervous system nulls our interoceptive sensitivity, creating dissociation and the inability for the brain to connect to and accurately govern and control certain areas of the body. 2. The priming of large muscle groups. It makes sense to realize that if our autonomic nervous system is in threat mode, it needs to ensure that we have the best chance of surviving the perceived danger. In simple terms, we need to be prepared to fight our way out of the situation, run and escape from it, or become immobile until it has passed. For each of these strategies, our fine motor skills are of little use. What the body needs is the power and strength of its large muscle groups. In fact, while the autonomic nervous system is in survival mode, these large muscle groups are primed for action. We all know this instinctively because we all have had the experience of feeling tension in our shoulders when we feel stressed and worried. At the same time, the part of the brain that is responsible for fine motor skills is inhibited. Fine motor skills come from the intricate use of small muscle groups, such as in the hands, tongue, lips, and face. Take a step back for a moment and consider the state of your nervous system when you're playing your musical instrument, be it during practice, your lessons, or when you're performing. Are you goal-orientated and obsessed with getting it right? Trying really hard and knowing that hard work is what it takes? Are you filled with self-talk about what you sound like and criticizing what is good enough, what is not good enough about your playing? Do you compare yourself with others, or do you feel insecure about your technical abilities, or threatened and insecure with your teacher, conductor, musical director, or fellow musicians? Perhaps you just have this sense of not being good enough yet, of wanting to perfect your playing and wanting to do so as quickly as possible. Sometimes you may have moments where you just think you'll never get it, where you feel like you're out of your depth and an imposter, or where you just really feel uncomfortable and insecure. Maybe that your goal is to play really fast and cleanly, or hit those top notes like no one else can. You may even dream about being a world-class player that leaves everyone in awe. If any of these experiences ring true to you, it means that your autonomic nervous system is activated and in survival mode when you are playing. In other words, when you are playing, your brain is inhibiting your fine motor skills and priming your large muscle groups. In this way, you are forcing your brain, probably for many hours each week, to create fine motor skills at the same time as inhibiting it from being able to do so. This is like driving down the motorway in 6th gear and reverse at the same time. What do you expect to happen to the motor? We are now getting a picture of how playing your instrument over so many hours with your nervous system in survival mode nulls your interoceptive sensitivity, disconnects you from feeling your body, and at the same time forces your brain into a forward and reverse movement. It is no surprise that this combination has a devastating effect on your fine motor skills. 3. Primary survival movements. Our body is born with 6 primary fine motor skill survival movements, as well as others that develop as we grow. The primary movements are instinctive and autonomous, and the brain knows how to perform them from birth. We didn't need to learn them, unlike all of our other movements, and they are not under our conscious control. They happen automatically in the same way that you blink and duck out of the way if something comes flying towards you. You are unable to control this response. 2 of these movements, the startle reflex and the suckling reflex, are particularly relevant to focal hand and focal embouchure dystonia. The startle reflex. This has several aspects to it. One that is a hyperextension of the fingers and followed by a hypercontraction of them as they curl tightly into the palm. So that's this movement. In babies, it is present so they automatically grasp onto their mother if they feel like they might fall. Whilst these 2 movements are often separated from each other in hand dystonia, they are equal to the primary survival movement of the hand. By this I mean that some people just experience the hyperextension of the fingers, but others experience just the hypercontraction. For other people, some fingers are hyperextended while others are hypercontracted. I have even seen people who, before they worked with me, had experienced the dystonia first as a hyperextension and then changed over time to a hypercontraction or vice versa. It is as if their hand got stuck in just a part of the reflex. The suckling reflex. This is a very complex movement. It involves the tongue moving towards the roof of the mouth as the muscles in the middle and back of the tongue harden. It then involves a backward movement of the tongue coordinated with the contraction and release of the muscles around the mouth, swallowing and breathing. I've seen over and over again how people with embouchure dystonia describe this exact movement happening whilst they are playing. This is the opposite movement from what we need when playing, which requires a soft tongue that moves forwards, upwards and downwards in the mouth, with just the tip becoming engaged to create precise articulation. There are 6 other survival movements that we develop as we grow up, and they're also relevant to musicians' focal dystonia, which are making a fist, snarling or smiling, biting, neck locking, and breath holding. They also happen automatically and are not under our conscious control. Making a fist. When our nervous system is hyperactivated, one of its automatic movements is to prime the muscles in the arm and hand to make a fist and be ready to strike a blow. I can remember how when I was young, I would wake up to find my hands in a fist. Sometimes during the day, I would suddenly realise that my hands were curled into a fist. Whilst often we do have some conscious control over relaxing the hand, for many people, the underlying subtle priming of the muscles do not relax as much as they try to make it do so. Snarling, smiling. Another of our automated responses is to snarl or smile. They come from the same fundamental movement and come out as one or the other, depending on the situation. If our deep brain perceives that we are safest if we create conciliation, it will create the smile movement. If it perceives that we need to show we are the aggressor to manage the situation, it will create the snarl movement. They use almost the same muscles with just some subtle differences. Since we've been educated not to snarl in public, this movement usually comes out as a forced smile. However, the basic tensing and backward movement of the cheek muscles happens before we have had time to control them. Biting. The third muscle group that becomes automatically primed are those around the jaw, which prepare the body to bite. As you increase your interreceptive sensitivity, you may well become aware of how much tension you constantly carry in your jaw. Most people who suffer from focal dystonia, be it embouchure or hand dystonia, hold significant tension in their jaw. Neck locking. Neck tension seems to be one of the most epidemic experiences of people today. In a large part, it is caused by one of our defense reflexes. If we were out in the wild and there was a physical threat, such as a predator, our deep brain needs to keep it in sight at all times. It has this need because at light speed velocity, it needs to assess the danger that this predator poses. For instance, you want to know if it is at a safe distance, if it has seen you, or if it is about to attack you, and so on. To keep the danger in sight, the neck becomes locked in its direction to override the fear reaction that wants to look away and hide. At a simple physiological level, neck tension often leads to problems in the cervical vertebra, trapped nerves, and a difficulty for the impulses from your brain to reach, particularly your hands. Throat tightening. In a similar way that the neck locks to overcome the fear reaction of looking away, the deep brain will sometimes tighten the throat to suppress a scream response. Remember that as human beings, we naturally live in communities. The scream is an instinctive response to call for help or a warning to the rest of the community. However, if the deep brain perceives that the best survival strategy is to remain unseen, it will override the scream response by tightening the throat. The most common way people describe this is saying they feel like they have a lump in their throat, they can't swallow, or that they feel like they have a rope or a hand around their throat. Breath holding. Last, but certainly not least, Breath holding is an automated and integral part of the hypoactivated state in the autonomic nervous system. As I talked about in the previous chapter, the survival strategy of the hypoactivation is to make the body as still and unperceivable as possible. It does this by tightening all the muscles to immobilize the body, creating a sense of inner collapse and a mental retreat into your inner world to disconnect from what is going on outside. As part of this process, it needs to reduce the movements that our body makes. In order to do so, we breathe at an absolute minimum. Therefore, the muscles tighten to inhibit our ability to take a deep breath, making it as shallow and invisible as possible. This is why so many people with focal dystonia describe how their breath seems to get stuck in their body or feel blocked in some way. The key issue about these responses are that they are not under our conscious control because our survival mechanisms are a priority for the brain. As I said earlier, the primary function of the brain, which comes before everything else, is to ensure our survival. Therefore, it uses the quickest and most powerful part of the brain to create these movements. I mentioned in chapter 1 that the deep brain, the part of the brain that is constantly scanning the environment, neuroception, for signs of threat or safety, works at a speed of 11 million bits of perceptual information per second. It is also working at this same speed in response to a perceived threat. This part of the brain is our subconscious, meaning that it is below our conscious awareness. The new part of our brain, referred to as the neocortex, does all our thinking. When we purposefully make a body movement, this is the part of the brain we're using. For instance, if I tell my thumb to curl into the palm of my hand, consciously making this movement, it is my neocortex that initiates the signal to move. Likewise, if I consciously try to relax my thumb, I am also using my neocortex to send that message. While the deep brain, as I have mentioned, is estimated by neuroscientists to work at 11 million bits of perceptual information per second, they calculate that the neocortex only functions at 10 to 60 bits. That is 1 million times slower. Now you can understand why you are unable to think your way into making your body stop the dystonic movements. The thinking brain is simply unable to override the instinctive survival mechanisms of the body. It is just not fast or powerful enough to do so. This realization can be quite a shock to many people. After all, we have been brought up in a culture that values our thinking capacity beyond anything else. In René Descartes' words, I think, therefore I am. We are a culture that has mistaken this statement and idealized the neocortex as the master of our brain and our life, who has ignored the value of what is going on in the invisibility of the subconscious and has not wanted to admit how much is occurring below our conscious control. If we add all this together, the dystonic symptoms begin to make sense. There is the dissociation with the body and the concurrent lack of interreceptive sensitivity. You are asking your body to be in 6th gear and reverse at the same time as you play, with your fine motor skills being inhibited. Then we have the automated survival movements of the body. A light begins to shine on why your body has become locked into these strange movements and why you're unable to control them no matter how hard you try. Part 2 will contain the last piece of the puzzle regarding what causes focal dystonia. This is important to understand before exploring how to resolve the dystonic movements. It is the vital question: what has caused your autonomic nervous system to get stuck in this activated state? And then in part 3, I give you a whole series of very practical brain spotting exercises that will help you to bring your nervous system into safe mode. And then later on will help you work on any dystonic movements that might still be left after that. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me today.